Hi, everyone. This is Hank Drake, founder and admin of the Facebook group of Vladimir Horowitz Appreciation Society and the Instagram page Vladimir Horowitz Pianist. And today we're going to be talking about, of course, Vladimir Horowitz, in specific, this recording, The Great Comeback. This was issued in 2019. It's a multi-disc set which includes the complete rehearsals for his 1965 comeback concert as well as rehearsals for his 1966 follow-up concert. It also includes an interview he did with the pianist Abram Chasins. Now, here's a little bit of the blurb that was put out when the album was released. First release of 6 unheard private recitals at Carnegie Hall, 2 complete studio sessions, 2 remastered concerts, all in a special 15 CD edition. First ever release of stunning improvisations by Horowitz at the piano, leaving the listener in astonishment and awe. Well, they're good improvs. One must remember that Horowitz, as he often stated, wanted to be a composer. He became a pianist because his family lost everything in the Russian Revolution and he had to support them. I think this goes to a separate question, but let's touch base on it. Or if Horowitz had followed his initial intent and become a composer, I think today he would probably be mostly forgotten. Certainly, if you listen to the compositions that he did complete, they're nice pieces. They're mostly high quality salon pieces. Now he may have developed further and become a more well known composer, a more substantive composer. But I think mostly he would be remembered pretty much like Metner. And let's face it, aside from piano files and cognoscenti, Metner is pretty much unknown as a composer. Only a few of his pieces are even in the far off regions of the standard repertoire. That's just a demonstrable fact. When's the last time you heard a Metner performance actually in concert? So he became a pianist, and of course, he became a titanic pianist. Certainly one of the very top, most important pianists of his time, perhaps the most important, and he changed the way people played the piano. Let's talk about the album itself. So the first several discs are the rehearsals. You hear him trying out the piano and improving a little bit. And the improvs are good. They're not quite as astonishing as some of the improvs one hears from Chifra, but they're certainly more interesting than what you would hear from most pianists today because most pianists don't know anything about how to improv. They can't play anything unless it's something that somebody composes for them, and they learn it by looking at the score. So there are rehearsals, and he's testing the piano. And as he goes through the various rehearsals as they progress, um, they get better and better. And of course, then comes the May 9th return concert. And everybody knows that he was very on edge at that time. And while there are beautiful moments in the playing, particularly as the concert progresses, at the beginning of the concert, his nerves are in control. This is this is apparent in the opening measures of the Bach Busoni, where he hits a massive clinker, and then later in the Schumann Fantasy, where he makes several mistakes during the coda of the second movement, which is absolutely monstrously difficult. Now, what happened is when they released the recording originally, they patched it up, and that has been misunderstood a little bit. Um, they had all the material they needed at the rehearsals. Some people said he went to Carnegie Hall the next day and recorded patches. That's not true. Everything was recorded already in the rehearsals, and that's where the patches come from. And you can particularly hear that they came from the April 14th rehearsal because although Horowitz is playing wonderfully, the piano is noticeably out of tune. Uh, so when you listen to the concert side by side, or if you have a good memory of the original album with the patches, and you listen to the April 14th rehearsal, you can hear that's where they edited out the mistake. Um, so that's part of it. There's also the April 17th, 1966 recital, the Scarlatti, the Mozart, the Beethoven variations. He's very much on edge, very ill at ease. It's almost as if he's nervous about being nervous, and he makes a number of mistakes. And they patched in things from the rehearsals for that. So that was fixed as well. Uh, so here what you have, let's get down to the basics of the album. I'm not going to go over the interview with Abram Chasins because that's been published on YouTube. First of all, it's a very lavish presentation. You have three essays. You have one about one from Tim Page, which is mostly about how New York has changed over the decades. The next is from Jed Disler, who is absolutely an authoritative pianophile. And then there's Bernard Horowitz, who has his essay called Towards the Flame, Vladimir Horowitz's 12-year sabbatical. It's also pretty lavishly illustrated with pictures. This is a picture taken from the recording of the 1968 television concert. And there's also numerous photographs taken during their rehearsals and also people waiting outside. They lined all around the block to get tickets for the concert as if it was a Beatles concert. For those of you who don't know who the Beatles are, where have you been? Uh, but they were a very, very popular group at the time. So here are some pictures that were taken during the recital, and they were taken in natural light. They weren't taken under control conditions. So some of these are a little bit on the fuzzy side, but they're worth seeing. They give you an idea of Horowitz's approach to the piano, which of course you can see in various videos where he sat up close to the piano and rather low. Um, and then there are also photos, if you go further in, from the rehearsals. So these pictures were taken at the rehearsals. And some of these were actually published in the New York Times when they announced that he was on his way back to the concert stage. Um, and there's also pictures of other people here, including some interesting things. Rudolf Serkin, who was a very good friend of Horowitz's, actually attended at least one of the rehearsals. This is him with Horowitz, and you really can't make it out here, but this is a very rare photo of Horowitz wearing glasses. He was nearsighted and couldn't see past about the third row from the stage. Um, so let's move on from the photos. Another one. Look at that crowd. That's the crowd of people waiting for him as he was leaving the concert. Uh, it was really, really something. So let's go ahead and look at the details. The first disc is the January 7th, 1965 rehearsal. He's testing the piano. It's a new piano, CD 186, which he used for his concerts from 1965 until 1969 when he stopped playing again. There's a rehearsal for the Bach, the Chopin Polonaise Fantasy in A flat major, some Debussy, some bits of the Schumann. Some of it's incomplete. Some of it he only plays excerpts. And then another rehearsal from January 13th, which is Somasovsky, Chopin Nocturne in F minor. That shows up all over in this set. Some more from the Schumann Fantasy. Debussy's Etude for the Eight Fingers, that's without thumbs. And he does something weird. There's a run in that you play with the fingers down the piano, and he does a glissando. And I have to say, he did that in his live recording from Carnegie Hall from the late 40s or 1950. And I have to say, I think it's a rather garish effect. I don't think he would have wanted that to be released, but we have it. There's also a Chopin mazurka. Um, Then we have a actual recording session, not at Carnegie, but at Columbia Studio, and this was for an all Chopin album. So while he was preparing for the concert, he was also getting ready to record an all Chopin album, and none of that was ever released. And it had the Polonaise Fantasy, the Nocturne in F minor, again, the Ballade in G minor, Mazurka in E minor, Mazurka in B minor, but only part of it, the Mazurka in F sharp minor, and then they have, as a bonus track, they've edited together the Polonaise Fantasy, and it's a very good performance, but I prefer the performance he did later live in 1966. Now, what's interesting is you hear the raw takes. So you hear where he stops, corrects, and goes back. And he's not temperamental at all. He's completely professional all the way through. Next is rehearsal of April 7th, 1965. Again, the Bach Busoni, Schumann Fantasy, Scarlatti Sonata, some Rachmaninoff, Chopin. So he's at the point where he's starting to make his final decisions of what's going to be on the program. And also Scriabin's Piano Sonata number 9. What's interesting is as he starts rehearsing this, he's playing it very much like he did at the February 1953 concert. But later, his interpretation evolves to be more like it was at the actual 1965 return concert. Then there is the final rehearsal, which is April 14th, 1965, where he's playing almost all of the repertoire except the Chopin Ballade that shows up at the concert. And really, if they had wanted to, they could have patched together an absolutely note perfect version of the concert. But Horowitz made the decision to leave some of the wrong notes in. And actually, as the concert goes on, there's fewer and fewer edits, and there's no edits of the encores that I could hear. So then here, after that, you have the two-disc non-edited version of the Historic Return. It was first issued in 2003 for Horowitz's centenary. Then after that, you have the November 9th, 1965 rehearsal. Now, this is sometimes called the Blackout Concert because what happened was, as Horowitz was playing, he got through some Scarlatti, Beethoven, some Scriabin. Then he went to start to play the Polonaise Fantasy of Chopin, which was going to be in that concert, in the April 1966 concert, and the power went out. The hall went completely dark. And then a moment, but Horowitz kept playing on, didn't miss a note. Of course, the recording equipment stopped recording. And then a stagehand came out with a flashlight and held it over the keyboard. And Horowitz leaned over and says, "What's going on?" And the stagehand says, "Power's out all over the block." But he kept playing for the rest of the concert. And actually, I have this piano at home, and when we have a power blackout, I open the windows and I start playing because what else is there to do? So after that, they have the April 17th, 1966 recital. And what is interesting is after that recital, in this case, he did go back to the Columbia studio and he re-recorded certain parts of the concert to make it acceptable for the album, and that was the Mozart Sonata. And after that, you also have the April 5th, 1966 rehearsal, where there's some parts of the repertoire. And what's interesting to me is listening to these is that the mistakes he made in these concerts were not the result of insufficient technique. It's not because he was out of practice. It's not because he was slowing down with age, because he was in his early 60s at this point. It's because he was nervous, and solely because he was nervous. And that interfered with his ability to play at his prime. But what you hear in these rehearsals is how he could play at his prime and when he was relaxed, and it's absolutely compelling. And I'd like to see more of these. I'd like to see more releases of their rehearsal recordings if they are available. I think they're a very interesting insight into how Horowitz worked. And of course, Horowitz has one of the rare distinctions of having had more of his recordings released since he died than were released during his lifetime. You've had a lot of the recordings from Carnegie Hall that were never released in their raw form. You've had the non-Carnegie recitals from 1966 to 1983, mostly released in their raw form. What's missing right now are what they call the Yale concerts. Those are the 1945 to 1950 Carnegie Hall recitals and one concert with Bruno Walter that were recorded by the Carnegie Hall Recording Company at Horowitz's own expense, and which right now are gathering dust in the Yale archives. A few of them have been released, most of them have not. My understanding is that after Horowitz died, it was Wanda who got final say on whether these recordings were issued, and she allowed the recordings of a few pieces to be issued, about 2 CDs worth of material, and she asked that other things be held back. After she died, the authority to release these was put into the hands of 3 different people. I'm not going to tell you their names. I will tell you, however, that there's one person who has vetoed the release of many of these recordings, and that person recently passed away. So, will Columbia release these recordings, or Sony as it's now called? Well, I think that depends very much on whether or not they see this commercial value, which is why if you don't have this and you can find it at a reasonable price, you should buy it, as well as the other Horowitz things, because that's the best guarantee that those other recordings will see the light of day. Of course, you can find them mostly on streaming services on YouTube where they've been pirated. But if you want it properly remastered, then by the label that's authorized to do so, then the best way to do that is to support this. Thanks very much. I'll be back with future videos about other Horowitz material and other Horowitz news. Take care.